They were one of the first electro-folk ensembles whose 1965 million-seller You Were On My Mind, which you just heard, entered the world a few months before Bob Dylan became a household name. The group was We Five, and one of the founders of the group, Jerry Burgan, joins us today along with Alan Rifkin, co-authors of a new book, Wounds to Bind, a memoir of the folk rock revolution. Welcome, guys.
Well, thank you. We're glad to be here.
So, Jerry, everybody wants to know, I mean, even if they've heard of We Five, they probably want to know how you started. And it is in the book, but could you tell us?
Oh, that's an awful thing to say. It's in the book, but yes, it is. I met Mike Stewart in grade school. Mm-hmm. We became friends, sang together in a choir, and as we were going into his high school, his older brother, John Stewart, mm-hmm. was a couple of years ahead of us in folk music and ultimately wound up being the banjo player in the Kingston Trio.
Wow.
And the trickle-down effect was very powerful in our lives because John was very talented, a great creative writer, and he was also exposed to the leading edge of what was happening in the folk world. We got the benefit of that and became actually pretty good at what we were doing long before we got out of high school. We were already singing and recording. Right. But we also met the manager of the Kingston Trio, Frank Werber, who most people who live in the Bay Area for very long know about him and that story. Mm-hmm. He knew that we were good, and he was looking for what the next thing was going to be. Mm-hmm. And we were signed as a folk group to the Kingston Trio's company, mm-hmm. and as soon as they opened the studio that they built in what is now the Zoetrope Cafe down in the basement of that,
right.
We came up to San Francisco and began recording, and You Were On My Mind was in one of the first recording sessions that we ever did here in San Francisco for Trident Productions, and right. That's kind of how we got from Southern California, where I grew up, to the Bay Area.
And speaking of the Bay Area, Alan, you know, there's a lot of mention in this book of a lot of the Hungry Eye, the Purple Onion, I mean, local hangouts. I mean, what's your connection to the Bay Area besides, you know, the We Five connection to the Bay Area?
I lived here in 81 to 82. In fact, I worked for the San Francisco Bay Guardian then. Mm-hmm. North Beach was a revelation for me. I mean, it had just, you know, it was Oz to me, being in the Bay Area. And I had been obsessed with this song since I was 10 years old. So I might have been in my subconscious fashioning a way to write about it, even had I never met Jerry. But this was a great opportunity.
In fact, that's a good question. How did you guys meet?
I had a friend who was the head of the journalism department at Azusa Pacific University, and it was Jim Willis. And I asked him if he would be interested in working with me on taking the book that I was writing and elevating it from the level of what I could create with the concepts and making sure that it was really well done. And he said, well, I'm too busy, but I think I'd like to introduce you to someone who could help. He introduced me to Alan. We met, talked a few times, found some common ground, and said, let's give this a shot.
Well, now let's get to some of there's so many different topics in this book that are fascinating about, you know, your rise to stardom and everything. But one of the things that I did want to touch on, which I thought was really fascinating, was your drummer, John Chambers, who happens to be African American. In the 1960s, the early 60s, there was still a lot of discrimination in a lot of parts of the country. Tell us a little bit about that portion of the book.
Sure. We recorded the song You Were On My Mind with a drummer named Jerry Granelli, who used to play with Vince Guaraldi. He's the guy you hear on the Peanuts music and that kind of thing. He was older than us, a jazz musician, and though he'd played on the record, when our manager asked him to play with us, he said, nah, they're kids, I can't do that. But I'll introduce you to a drum student that I have who's really good. Turns out in his teens, he'd already played with John Coltrane.
Wow.
And so we had our first performance booked in San Jose after the record broke in San Francisco, and it was on the charts. John shows up at the place that we're going to play, and he was black.
Yeah.
And so we went through the songs and we played it. The first night went great. The week went great. Everybody said, gee, this guy plays drums terrific. we never did another show without him for 2 years.
And I think the most interesting thing, that story, was that in the clip that we showed,
Yes.
you can see the silhouette of John.
The opening
playing,
clip, yes, on
right?
the Hollywood Palace, right?
And you could see him, but you don't realize it's him. And there was a very interesting story about that they actually didn't want him.
Well, I don't know. Yeah,
on
I don't want to
stage.
put words in their mouth, but we showed up with 6 people, and they were expecting a 5-piece band
Right.
that didn't look like we looked exactly. And in fact, that's the band that they thought was going to be kind of coming. And so they had the problem of, gee, there's 6 of them, and we only blocked 5. Let's put him out in the foreground. We'll start with the drums. And then as soon as the band comes in, we'll zoom past the drums, and then the whole video just showed the 5 people, and at the very end it pans back to the drums because it starts and ends with drums.
Right.
And it solved a lot of problems for them, and it also shot him in silhouette, so nobody could complain about who was or wasn't in the band.
This also was an era when other bands, for instance, Booker T and the MGs, who were integrated, had random artwork on the cover rather than a photograph of the band.
Well, one of the things we did want to show, we have some photos that you had sent us of things
Okay.
that, newspaper articles and posters. I mean, this
There's
is
a classic.
I mean, most Bay Area people remember KEWB. I mean,
I miss
and their
it.
jingle. But and it's funny because the KEWB used to have studios here in Jack London Square, which is where
Right.
we're at right now.
And we came over and shot here when it was KEWB.
Wow. And this is a great poster because it has mention of the Byrds and other great groups, and you were performing with them.
Yes, that
during
poster
that
was a Dick Clark Caravan of Stars tour, and it was We Five, the Byrds, Paul Revere and the Raiders, Bo Diddley and the Duchess, and various opening acts, and we did a 1-month bus tour with
Wow.
those people playing in everything from some National Guard armories to the McCormick Place before it burned down in Chicago, huge auditoriums. It was a terrific experience to travel with that blend. And at one point, our tour and the Rolling Stones tour all played at the Omni in Pittsburgh.
So, obviously the next question is, what's next for Jerry Burgan?
Well, we're here really because we came to Oakland to go to the Diesel bookstore to do a book signing. This book is what I've been working on for quite some time, and our expectation is that now as the book is out, and I also have a CD that's Jerry Burgan Reflections, Songs and Stories. And I
Because you are still writing and
Right.
composing.
And I perform with my wife, Debbie Burgan, who for many years was the lead singer in We Five. And we are just trying to get out and amongst the people, spreading the word, and playing music of the folk era up to the beginning of the folk rock era, because it's what's nearest and dearest to my heart. It's great fun, people love it, and we tell stories about the songs, where they came from, sing them, play them, and encourage people to join in with us.
Well, great, Jerry Alan, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you
But
so much.
Jerry's book, Wounds to Bind, a memoir of the folk rock revolution, is available on Amazon and all major e-sellers. You can also get more information by logging on to woundstobind.com.